first up, give us the sense of what it's like in the United Kingdom right at the moment with the news of Prince Philip's death, only months away from his 100th birthday.
Well, a great deal of sadness, and particularly sadness, I think, that he didn't make that milestone of that 100th birthday. No shock, of course, because he had been ill for some time and had only recently come out of hospital after having been there for a month. So no sense of shock, but there's a limit to what people can do here to respond to his death because of current COVID restrictions. For example, even though I'm standing at Buckingham Palace and there are a couple of hundred bouquets and floral tributes which have been left at the gates, there are signs up specifically asking people not to leave flowers and saying that those flowers will be removed pretty quickly. The royal household are particularly keen that people don't gather either here or at Windsor Castle because of COVID regulations. And for example, even though the official announcement of Prince Philip's passing was posted as is tradition on a wooden board outside Buckingham Palace just after midday, it was taken away again an hour later because people had gathered to take photographs. I think the overriding emotion from many people in this country, though, is sadness, obviously, at Prince Philip's passing, a great deal of respect for a life well lived, but now concern for Her Majesty the Queen, who after 73 years of marriage has now got to adapt to life as a widow. And one of the benefits, I have to say, of COVID over the past year has been the amount of time that they have been able to spend together, because when he went into retirement from public life 4 years ago, it meant that they spent quite a lot of time apart. He was at a cottage in Sandringham in Norfolk, about 3 hours drive from London, while the Queen would stay at Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle or doing engagements around the country. But because of COVID restrictions, they effectively had to move into Windsor Castle together with a small selection of household staff. So there has been a lot of time spent for reflection on their lives over the last year, and that is something that I'm sure the Queen will hold as a treasured memory in this time of grief.
Absolutely, Ian, and as we just heard in Rhiannon Mills' package, Prince Philip saying on his 50th anniversary that tolerance is the essential ingredient for a happy marriage. He certainly led an exceptional life, a very long one. What aspects of it resonate most with the people in Britain?
I think inevitably people have always seen him first and foremost as the partner of the Queen, the person who was either at her side or a few steps behind, constantly in support of her monarchy. And the job would have been so much more difficult without him there as her life partner. But I think that the obituaries that people have been reading about and hearing and watching on television today are reminding everyone what a life he led in his own right, and the achievements that he had as a war hero, as someone who saw active service in World War II, as someone who had so many charitable functions and who engaged in sports, who was a keen sailor. He had a pilot's license, and then later in life became a world-class carriage driving champion. So it's someone who had a lot of things that he got involved in. But I think that what has struck me is listening to people phoning in radio stations today talking about their own personal encounters with Prince Philip, and the vast majority of those have been people who went through the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. Millions of people throughout the Commonwealth went through the various stages of the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme since it was instituted in the 1950s. And at any one time, about 500,000 people, young people, are doing it, giving them a sense of adventure, giving them a sense of voluntary service. And a lot of the people who went through that and got their gold award talked about how they had met Prince Philip and the questions that he would ask them about their service. And I think that has touched so many people of many generations, because children have done it, their children and their grandchildren have done it all around the world. And I think that is what will have a lot of personal memories for people in Britain and indeed throughout the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and when you think about the worldwide feeling towards the Duke, there was a sense of like a real sense of kinship with him, because people thought and saw him as real. He lost his temper at times, he had a laugh at times. He was very much a transparent individual in so many ways.
Indeed. I mean, he had a very challenging childhood to deal with as well. I mean, he described himself as a refugee, a word that we hear a lot about in recent years, and there's a lot of controversy attached to it. But Prince Philip was essentially a refugee fleeing Cyprus, at Corfu, where he was born, coming to live in Germany for a period of time, at a time that the Nazis were coming to power, and then on to Britain and becoming a British citizen. And, there was a lot of people regarding him as not necessarily suitable material to be marrying the then Princess Elizabeth. We tend to think now of the spotlight focusing on royal marriages and whether people are going to fit in with the royal family. Well, that's nothing new, because Prince Philip endured that back in the 1940s, but he carved out his own role within the British institution, within the royal household, and even though the Queen was obviously the person with the constitutional authority, the constitutional power, Prince Philip, as you could hear from some of his children in that piece by Rhiannon talking about their lives, he was first and foremost a father and a grandfather and a great-grandfather as well. And I think that one of the things that people will be looking at over the next couple of days is how this will affect the schism that there has been in the royal family because of the decision by Harry and Meghan to move from Britain to a new life in Los Angeles. There was a lot of expectation that Prince Harry would be coming back to Britain to celebrate his grandfather's 100th birthday. Well, now the expectation is that he will come back for a funeral, and how that will lead to perhaps a repairing of relations within the royal family that we have seen so broken apart over the last 12 months.
Absolutely, and we've certainly just recently heard so many tributes worldwide from some of the world leaders. Have we seen any members of the royal family responding to the news?
No, there haven't. I mean, those interviews that you have heard from people like Princess Anne and Prince Edward were recorded in advance. There's been no word from anyone within Buckingham Palace, either a member of the family or even staff, beyond that announcement that was made at midday UK time of the passing of Prince Philip. I think that the tradition has been with something like this that the focus in the first 24 hours is very much on looking back at the life of the person who has just died, without getting into any details about funeral arrangements, for example, or indeed the nature of his death. Was his death expected? Was anyone with him when he died? I think those are details which may emerge in the coming days. We know that Prince Charles has travelled from his home at Highgrove in Gloucestershire to Windsor Castle to be with his mother, and we would expect that we will hear more details of the arrangements for funerals, for the funeral and other events to mark Prince Philip's passing in the coming days.
Thanks, Ian. We really appreciate your input today.